There is a place on this planet so deep, so remote, and so hostile that more human beings have stood on the surface of the moon than have ever descended to its floor. It lies not on some distant world, but here, beneath the waves of our own Pacific Ocean. At its lowest point, the sea presses down nearly 11 kilometers, roughly 7 miles, into the crust of the Earth. If you could lift Mount Everest from the land and drop it into this abyss, its summit would still be drowned beneath more than a mile of black water. This is the Mariana Trench, and its deepest hollow, Challenger Deep, is the most extreme frontier remaining on the map. Almost nothing about it is welcoming to life as we know it. And yet, against every expectation, something down there endures in the crushing, endless dark. The Mariana Trench carves a long, crescent-shaped scar across the floor of the western Pacific, curving for well over 1,000 miles east of the Mariana Islands and near the island of Guam. It was born from the slow violence of the planet itself, where one great slab of the Earth's crust grinds beneath another and plunges into the mantle. This is a subduction zone, and the trench is the seam it leaves behind. Along its length, the seabed drops away far below the surrounding abyssal plains, which are already thousands of meters deep. Within this trench lies Challenger Deep, a small depression believed to be the deepest known point in any ocean on Earth. Measured with modern sonar, it descends to roughly 11,000 meters, close to 36,000 feet. Numbers like these are easy to read and almost impossible to truly feel. To grasp that depth, imagine flying in a passenger jet at cruising altitude, some 10 to 11 kilometers above the ground. Now invert the entire journey and point it straight down into the sea. That is roughly the distance from the sunlit surface to the floor of Challenger Deep. A stone dropped from the surface would take the better part of an hour to complete the fall. Light, sound, and warmth all fail long before the bottom. Everything that defines the world we live in, the sky, the horizon, the reassuring press of air, is stripped away layer by layer as you descend. What remains is a column of water so tall that its own weight becomes a force of annihilation. The deep ocean is not simply a bigger version of the sea we swim in. It is another world entirely, one that begins just a few meters below the shimmer of the waves. The descent begins in the sunlit zone, the thin, bright skin of the ocean, where light still pours through and life flourishes in blues and greens. But this layer is shallow, reaching down only a couple hundred meters. Below it, the color drains from the water with startling speed. Red vanishes first, then orange and yellow, until everything is rendered in cold shades of blue. This is the twilight zone, a dim realm where the last faint traces of sunlight linger but never fully arrive. Photosynthesis becomes impossible. The water grows colder and heavier with every meter. Creatures here often have enormous eyes to gather what little light survives, and many begin to make their own. Already, only a few hundred meters down, we have left behind the world our bodies were built for, and the trench still waits, kilometers further into the dark. Beyond the twilight, at around 1,000 meters down, the light finally dies completely. This is the midnight zone, and it makes up the greater part of the deep ocean by volume. No sunlight has ever reached here, not once in the history of the planet. The darkness is total and permanent, a blackness deeper than any night on the surface. The temperature hovers just a few degrees above freezing, and yet this is not an empty void. In the perfect dark, life has learned to make its own light. Tiny sparks and glowing threads drift through the water, produced by animals using chemical reactions in their bodies. This bioluminescence is used to lure prey, to startle predators, to find a mate in a world without landmarks. To descend into the midnight zone is to fall through a slow, silent snowfall of living light, scattered across an ocean of ink. As the depth increases, so does the true terror of the deep, a force that has nothing to do with monsters. It is pressure. At the surface, the atmosphere presses on our bodies at a level we never notice. But every 10 meters of descent adds roughly the weight of another atmosphere on top of you. By the time you reach the floor of Challenger Deep, the pressure is more than 1,000 times what we feel at sea level. It is a weight, measured in tons, pressing on every hand-sized patch of surface. Unprotected, a human body would be crushed almost instantly, folded and collapsed by the sheer mass of water overhead. Ordinary submarines would be flattened like empty cans. This is the Great Barrier that has kept the trench sealed away, a wall of pressure so immense that reaching the bottom is closer to a spaceflight than an ordinary dive. The cold is the trench's second guardian. Down in the Hadal depths, the water sits at only a degree or two above freezing, held there in permanent, sunless refrigeration. There is no warmth from above, and almost none from below. Combined with the pressure, this cold slows everything, from the chemistry of bodies to the pace of decay. Time itself seems to move differently in the deep. There are no seasons, no day and no night, no storms to disturb the stillness. Currents creep along the bottom rather than rush. For an animal living here, existence is a matter of extraordinary patience, waiting in near-freezing blackness for food that may only arrive by chance. It is a landscape defined by absence, of light, of heat, of noise, of nearly everything we associate with a living world. And still, the trench is not truly silent, nor truly dead. For most of human history, the trench was pure imagination, a number on a chart and nothing more. That changed in 1960. In a specially built vessel called the Trieste, two men set out to do what many believed impossible, to descend all the way to the bottom of Challenger Deep. The Trieste was not a sleek submarine but a bathyscaphe, essentially a heavy steel sphere hung beneath a large float filled with gasoline for buoyancy. Inside that cramped sphere, barely large enough for two people, rode Jacques Piccard, a Swiss engineer, and Don Walsh, a United States Navy lieutenant. They would trust their lives to the sphere's thick walls, against a pressure that could crush almost anything else. The dive itself was a slow, tense fall into the unknown, hour after hour, deeper than anyone had ever gone before, with no certainty of what waited below or whether they would return. The descent took hours as the Trieste sank through the fading light and into the endless black. At one point during the plunge, a crack spread across an outer window under the mounting strain, a chilling reminder of the forces bearing down on the tiny craft. Still they continued. Finally, after falling for most of the day, the Trieste settled gently onto the floor of Challenger Deep, kicking up a soft cloud of pale sediment. Piccard and Walsh became the first, and, for more than half a century, the only people to reach the deepest point of the ocean. Through the small porthole, into water no human eye had ever seen, they peered out at the bottom of the world. What they reported would reshape how scientists imagined the deep. Life, it seemed, was not confined to the warmer waters above. Something was down there, even in that impossible place. Piccard and Walsh spent only a brief time on the bottom before beginning the long climb back to the surface and the sunlight. Their stay was short, the visibility poor, the sediment easily stirred into blinding clouds, but they had proven something profound, that human beings could reach the very deepest place on Earth and return alive. It was a triumph to rank alongside the great expeditions to the poles and, later, to space. And yet, remarkably, it was not followed by a rush of exploration. The trench was so difficult, so dangerous, and so expensive to reach that after the Trieste's historic dive, no human returned to Challenger Deep for a very long time. The deepest point on the planet, once conquered, slipped back into silence and obscurity, visited only rarely by unmanned instruments. The abyss kept most of its secrets, guarded by pressure, distance, and the sheer difficulty of the descent. Decades passed. Robots and unmanned probes visited the trench, gathering samples and hints of what lived below, but the deepest point remained largely untouched by human presence. Then, in 2012, more than 50 years after the Trieste, a single person prepared to descend to Challenger Deep once more. The filmmaker and explorer James Cameron had spent years developing a radical new submersible, the Deep-Sea Challenger. Unlike the Trieste, it was designed for a solo pilot, built as a tall, narrow craft, engineered to fall and rise quickly through the water column. Cameron would go alone, sealed inside a small pilot sphere, carrying cameras to capture the abyss in a way no one had before. It was a return to a place almost no living person had seen firsthand, an attempt to bring the deepest point on Earth back into human view after half a century of silence. Cameron's descent in the Deep-Sea Challenger was a plunge into a world few had ever glimpsed. Sealed alone in the cramped pilot sphere, He fell for hours through the vanishing light, past the twilight and midnight zones, into the hadal dark. When he reached the bottom, he found a landscape that was both alien and strangely serene, a flat, pale desert of fine sediment, stretching beyond the reach of his lights. It was, by his description, a stark and desolate place, more like the surface of another planet than anywhere on Earth. He spent time exploring the trench floor, filming and collecting samples, before technical limits forced his return to the surface. His solo dive marked only the second time human beings had reached the deepest point of the ocean, and the first to do so with the tools to truly document it. The images he brought back stunned the world. For all its hostility, the trench is not lifeless. Life has found a foothold even at the very bottom, in the crushing cold and dark of the Hadal zone. Among the most abundant residents are amphipods, small shrimp-like crustaceans that swarm in surprising numbers wherever food arrives. When a piece of a dead animal drifts down from above, these scavengers gather quickly, stripping it clean. They have evolved to withstand pressures that would destroy almost anything from the surface, their bodies fine-tuned by unimaginable spans of time. To thrive here is to be built for a world defined by scarcity and force. These tiny creatures are the cleanup crew of the abyss, endlessly patient, endlessly hungry, waiting in the blackness for the next chance meal to fall from a sunlit world they will never see. In their persistence lies a quiet, astonishing truth about the reach of life. Stranger still are the giant single-celled organisms known as xenophyophores, some of the largest single cells known to exist. Despite being composed of just one cell, they can grow to remarkable sizes, forming delicate, intricate structures on the trench floor. They have been observed even in the deepest reaches of the ocean, quietly gathering sediment and building fragile homes for themselves in the mud. These creatures blur the line between what we expect a single cell to be and the complex forms we associate with larger animals. They are living reminders that in an environment as extreme as the trench, life does not simply survive. It takes shapes we would never predict. Scattered across the Hadal seabed, these delicate giants filter the endless rain of particles from above, hidden collaborators in an ecosystem almost entirely powered by scraps falling from the distant, sunlit surface far overhead. Perhaps the most haunting inhabitants of the deep trenches are the snailfish. Pale, soft-bodied, and almost translucent, they drift through some of the deepest waters where any fish has ever been found. Without scales or heavy bones, their bodies are gelatinous and flexible, an adaptation that helps them endure the immense pressure that would rupture a more rigid animal. They move slowly through the near-freezing dark, feeding on the small creatures that share their world. There appears to be a limit, somewhere in the deepest trenches, beyond which the pressure grows too severe for any fish to survive, and the snailfish live near that very edge. Ghostly and delicate, they seem too fragile for such a violent place, yet they are perfectly matched to it. To glimpse one is to see life pressed to its absolute physical boundary, thriving where almost nothing else with a backbone can. But what could possibly feed a world where sunlight never reaches and plants cannot grow? The answer drifts down endlessly from above, a phenomenon known as marine snow. Throughout the ocean, tiny organisms live and die, and countless fragments of their remains, along with waste and dust, clump together and begin a slow fall toward the depths. This gentle, ceaseless drizzle of organic particles sinks for days or weeks, feeding creatures at every level as it descends. By the time it reaches the trench floor, only a faint fraction remains, but for the animals waiting there, it is life itself. The entire Hadal ecosystem is sustained, indirectly, by the sunlit surface thousands of meters above. Every amphipod, every snailfish, every strange single cell depends on this thin, falling manna. Marine snow is the invisible thread connecting the brightest and darkest parts of the ocean into a single, unbroken chain of life. Occasionally, the deep reveals sources of energy that owe nothing at all to the sun. In parts of the ocean floor, cracks in the crust release mineral-rich fluids and chemicals from within the earth. Around such places, entire communities can arise that feed not on sunlight, but on chemistry itself, drawing energy from the planet's inner heat and minerals. These oases hint at just how resourceful life can be, and how much we still do not understand about